the trade war between the US and Canada is back on. And I want to show you why this matters, not just for these two countries, but for the rest of the world, because this has geopolitical consequences. It's about China as well. It's about the rest of us. But it's certainly about these two countries. And the way to get a sense of that is to look literally under the bonnet of the economy, to get a sense of just how these two countries interact economically. And a good place to do that, if we zoom in, it's here. It's Michigan, it's Detroit, it's Windsor. It is the home of North American car making, at least traditionally. And the interesting thing about this border, we went there just kind of recently, is just how much commerce there is between it. This is the busiest border between Canada and America anywhere. You've got trucks going over all the time, and most of those trucks are filled with parts that are used for making cars. Cars like this, Chrysler Pacific, are actually made on the Canadian side of the border. But if you open up the door, like I said, we are going literally under the bonnet. If you could have opened up the door, you'll see parts like this. This is called a striker. It's the thing, basically, if you close your car door, this is what it latches onto. It's not necessarily super sophisticated, but it's really important and it can't go wrong. And right now, the strikers for a lot of cars made in that kind of Detroit area, they're made kind of across the border in Windsor, Ontario. So they're made there. But if we follow the journey of one of those parts as it's being made, you'll get a sense, if you multiply that by kind of 20, 30,000, because cars are made of that many parts, if you multiply that by that, you will get a sense of why this is so complex here. So the steel for the striker, it's made in Wixom, so just north of Detroit. It gets sent over the border, goes across the bridge there. It gets moved across to another plant where it's heat treated. It gets sent back across the border for plating. You can see it's crossing the border again and again. Then it goes across the border one more time to be packaged back in Windsor, Ontario. And then it gets sent across the border again for assembly into the final car. Now, this is just one example, one part, one particular journey. But like I say, this has already crossed the border 4 times. And that's actually below the average. There are many parts that cross the border kind of 6, 7, 8 times just as they're being made before they get to the finished car. This is what you call basically a single market, an entirely porous border. And if you start imposing tariffs on this stuff going across, then you can see you've got a big problem, big consequences, really inflationary for people. And so thus far, even though there has been this trade war, a lot of this stuff has been excluded. Certainly the car parts have been excluded. Some of the steel has been tariffed. But here's what's interesting about this, okay? So that was one tiny example. Big picture here, Canada is massively integrated with America. So imagine that all the way across the border. This is showing you Canadian exports and where they go to. So this is the stuff that potentially gets tariffed now, and the majority of it goes to America. Just look at how much higher that bar is than everywhere else. There's the US in second place, by the way. Majority of it goes to America. Same thing for Canadian imports. And Mark Carney has said, listen, if we're going to have this trade war, we're going to be imposing tariffs on American goods coming across. That's a big problem for Canada as well. And this is why a lot of people are looking at the Canadian economy and going, this looks kind of recessionary to us. It's going to have a big impact, really big impact. But it could also have an impact on the US. And obviously, America isn't as dependent on Canada as Canada is on America. But look at steel imports. So where is America importing its steel from? Well, Canada is up there in the top position. There's Mexico, there's Brazil, South Korea, but Canada at the top. Same for aluminum, I should say. It's even more stark there. So much of America's aluminum comes from Canada. And obviously, actually, that has already been tariffed. And part of these talks that have just broken down were about trying to get the tariffs on this stuff down, because higher tariffs on Canadian aluminium mean that's more expensive for car producers and producers of everything else, aircraft, for instance, in America. You see how this all kind of intertwines. And the big picture here, if we're going kind of looking historically, how did you get that border where you have a part that's crossing kind of 4, 5, 6 times? It's largely down to the fact that tariffs between the two countries came down and down and down. They came down in the kind of, in the 80s and the 90s with the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, going down, 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 basically to 0. So Canadian goods have been able to enter the US, and US goods going into America as well, with basically 0 tariffs for the most part, for most of recent history, for decades, all the way up until there. What is it? Well, that's Donald Trump's first term. So you can see that spike there over various talks over various different commodities. But this is as nothing compared with what we're seeing right now, what we actually have in place. Look at where the line is now. Just look at that. up at kind of 3.5%. And these are the tariffs that are in place right now. So what we're seeing on the border, not just the threats, that's what we're seeing. And it's worth just having a bit of context. Historically, that's maybe not unprecedented, but we've never seen anything like that for kind of going back 40, 50 years. But if you compare Canada and those tariff rates, effective tariff rates they're called, compare them to other countries around the world, clearly they are lower. Okay, so there you've got China, you've got up above 20% just recently, you've got Japan, Brazil, Turkey, India, Russia, even the UK there, because of course we're having to face a 10% tariff. Canada's a fair bit lower than that, partly because so many goods are going across the border and most of them have been excluded, like that striker part recently. Well, these new tariffs, the kind of threat that the US is talking about, the US Trade Representative, is these Section 338 tariffs. That basically doubles that. So that is a big impact, at least for Canada. But here's what's interesting and kind of quite nerve-wracking. It could be bigger still than that, because we just had this social media post from Donald Trump, and of course a lot of this is positioning, but even so. He says, from the start of next year, tariffs on all cars, trucks, both large and small, automotive parts, think about that part we just saw a moment ago, think about that, and steel will be increased to 50%. And for a lot of this stuff, previously it was excluded. The threat is it's going to be included. In other words, you're going to have tariffs on the stuff that was zero tariff before. Massive, massive economic consequences if this does come into play. And behind the scenes, since this began, you have seen Canada responding. Canadian consumers in particular, there's been this kind of move to try and buy more Canadian stuff. And if you look at food consumption in Canada, this line is just showing you food consumption of Canadian food and how it's spiked up, and how American food, this is in Canada, consumption of American food has gone down. Since that point, what happened there, that was Liberation Day. That was the moment that Donald Trump said, look, I'm slapping tariffs on Canada. People in Canada are saying, no, we don't want to buy American, California orange juice. We don't want to buy Jack Daniel's whiskey, all of this stuff. That has had a consequence. But that's only one thing. And already you're also seeing Mark Carney saying, okay, we're not just going to kind of do those things, we're also going to make big changes to our tariff rules as well, so that we're trying to bring in goods from elsewhere. So up until recently, this is showing you the tariffs that various different countries around the world have on Chinese electric vehicles. And you'll remember, America has 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. That actually goes back to Joe Biden, really high, basically saying, we don't want your Chinese EVs. Canada had the same thing, up until Mark Carney going to Beijing and saying, no, we're going to lower the tariff. We're going to lower it down to there. There are some quotas in place, so it's only so many. But nonetheless, that is a massive shift, isn't it? And it goes to one of the concerns that Donald Trump has, which is, look, Canada is on the rise. We want to be making more stuff domestically. We don't want to be importing things from China. Well, Mark Carney has just said, we're going to import more things from China. And the one area where you haven't necessarily seen that kind of shift to China is this. This is Canadian oil exports. So Canada, a massive oil producer, particularly kind of tar sands. And recently, the dark blue bits are showing you America, the stuff that goes to America. The light blue bits is basically everywhere else. And what do you see from this chart? You see that almost all of it goes to the US. And why is that? Well, here's kind of a striking thing. Partly, it's because a lot of the refineries in America are set up to process that kind of sticky tar sands. It's a really hard job to do, and America refineries are quite good at it. But partly, just as much, so the kind of oil sands, mostly in Alberta, just as much, it's because the pipelines that take that oil from where it's coming out of the ground to the refineries, where do most of them go? They almost all go to America. It's the Keystone, it's the main line, and there's others as well. So the majority of Canadian oil goes to America because that's where the pipes have been built, have been laid. But here's the kind of striking thing to think about right at the end. Mark Carney is now trying to get a new pipeline constructed alongside, more or less, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, going towards Vancouver, going towards Canada's west coast, so that oil can be sent to China. So you can see this is not just about the relationship between the US and Canada. It's not even just about the kind of, this trade war we're in at the moment. It's about the bigger geopolitical question of who is going to be dominant in the world economy in the future. And that's why this is going to be quite a roller coaster.